All right, we are live with Mark as a remote correspondent.
Hello.
Some campground somewhere in the great state of California.
It's been my permanent home after the election, so I'm just trying to see if everything works properly.
Even in California? You're going to stay in California?
We could do a broadcast from here. No, I'm going to be in Arizona, actually. That's not true. I'll be in Arizona.
Okay, I was going to say.
Everyone's leaving for that week to different places, different undisclosed locations, put it that way.
Awesome. Well, to make things easier for everybody, we're doing a Q&A today, which involves less carrying of books and things like that to the campground. We also may have limited data, so we'll see how it goes as it happens, but just wanted to warn everybody on that. So to get things rolling, those of you who have not done a Q&A before, please help me out and type the word question followed by the question.
Or Q. What about just
Q? Followed by a question. But that helps me accumulate. And I do try to get questions, not only super chats, but I try to take a lot of just general questions, things like that. And we'll get rolling as soon as
I just want to say that this is just the beginning of our series, so I don't have anywhere near all the answers. So if I don't know, I'm going to say I don't know because I haven't gotten there yet. I'm reading about 75 books at the same time, memoirs of all the different Watergate people. So I may not have the answer to your question, which I'm happy to tell you I don't have the answer to your question. Or, in other words, like, Tuesday, we're going to do a different Watergate burglar. So I don't want to get into that because I'll be getting into it on Tuesday. So I don't want to repeat everything and then have it not have any meaning on Tuesday. So there is that. So keep in mind, whatever I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know because I haven't gotten there yet. So let's go.
Okay. Fair enough. And by the way, Mark's sound is the best that it's probably ever been on any stream. I don't know what you guys think.
Absolutely great. Yeah, it's fantastic sound out here in the woods. That's all I could do.
Yes.
If I could just stay out here with the sound and get a satellite dish. I'm running off multiple solar panels, a Jackery generator. So I have put together a slapdash rural power system here. And I got about 50% power in the generator department, but that's plenty for me right now.
Awesome. But yeah, being outdoors, it's a miracle how it really smooths the sound out everywhere. There's no echoing.
Is that true? Is that true?
No, yeah, it really does sound great. You sound just rich, full with no extra noises. Wow. So always from the wild will be Mark Groubert. And we have a couple questions coming in, starting with Bushrider question. How did Rockefeller wrangle the VP spot?
Well, I listening to and reading about Pat Buchanan, who explained it in incredible detail. He didn't wrangle anything. It was a choice between Barry Goldwater, Jerry Ford, and Nelson Rockefeller, or Ronald Reagan. And Buchanan felt that his heart was with the Goldwater thing because he wanted Goldwater to go out in a classy manner of his career. So his heart was into Goldwater. But he knew also that Reagan was going to be coming on his own as a monster down the road. And he does join the Reagan campaign and the Reagan administration. So he didn't want Reagan, who was a beast, politically, to be in the second slot bigger than Ford. That being said, Ford had no choice whatsoever, and then they came up with Nelson Rockefeller as a compromise because they could get rid of him. His days were over. His political power had waned. The liberal wing of the Republican Party had essentially declined. So they all felt, and this is Buchanan's idea and a couple other people, that the safest choice for 1980 and 1976 would be Nelson Rockefeller, in terms of a guy that they can control and not be hampered by. If that answers the question, that's the answer I have.
All right, perfect. And I should add one more clarification. We're only answering questions that are related to Watergate, not to the wildfire situation or anything LA oriented.
Yeah,
so
I
I
don't
should have
know.
clarified that to begin with. So yeah, no, just Watergate
What?
today, folks. Just Watergate.
Oh no,
okay?
Let's get into the wildfire discussion. Wherever the hell the wildfires are, there's always wildfires. Let's talk about earthquakes. Yeah.
Whose great idea was it to let Liddy come up with the plans for a lot of these operations?
He didn't come up with them. In fact, he was a dupe. The only thing he came up with was Operation Gemstone, which was an overall plan with sub gems underneath it, ruby and sapphire and everything else. A lot of that was knocked down because it was too expensive. He just presented a massive plan and went wide on it to see what they would pick, and they cherry picked what they wanted. But the break-ins and all that stuff, there were break-ins and black bag jobs, which Liddy had done for the FBI. So he knew how to do break-ins. And they did do a lot of break-ins. That was a separate part of the overall Gemstone program. There was a lot of crazy crap in Gemstone. John Mitchell threw out most of it, the kidnapping of delegates, kidnapping of protesters, prostitutions on a boat off the coast of Miami. A lot of that went by the wayside. But Liddy was asked by John Dean to present an overall program, and John Dean assured him that there was tons of money to pay for this stuff. And indeed, there was tons of money to pay for this stuff. They gave $250,000 just to McCord for electronic devices. None of it ever seemed to surface. McCord either ripped them off or never got the things on purpose. The walkie-talkies never worked, and the other equipment never seemed to work either. But they gave McCord a ton of money for eavesdropping, bugging, photographic equipment. But to answer your question, Liddy was not the mastermind of these break-ins. Hunt and McCord were. And this all comes from Liddy's supervisor, which is, excuse me, Jeb Magruder and the infamous John Dean. So Liddy, in a lot of ways, was out of his league, being kind of blindsided by the two CIA operatives, or three CIA operatives, if you count Martinez, which we'll do on Tuesday. But McCord and Hunt clearly were lying, clearly were in cahoots together. And just to give you an example of the McCord-Hunt CIA connection with Watergate, both of them said that they couldn't enter the building because there was a burglar alarm in the Watergate that was set to go off at 10 p.m. unless it was disabled by the last person to leave or put in until 11 o'clock. And there was McCord used this as an excuse to cancel two of the break-ins, and Liddy Hunt backed him up. Indeed, I saw the alarm. It was this tripwire alarm, blah, blah, blah. There was no alarm. It was completely made up. The engineer in the building, can you hear me? Yeah. The engineer in the building says there was no such burglar alarm in the Watergate. So both Hunt and McCord, and nobody knows why to this day, were lying about the burglar alarm on the 6th floor, the DNC floor. There was no burglar alarm. Why they said it and how they thought they can get away with it, which they essentially did, is interesting. But both Hunt and McCord lying about the same imaginary burglar alarm has linked them together as co-conspirators in taking down and blowing up this break-in. And there's other lies we'll get into. They've been caught in a bunch of different lies about certain things, the bugs that were supposedly put in there. But the burglar alarm thing is pretty heavy. It's hard to get away from that because Hunt in his book goes into detail of how the burglar alarm worked. And a investigative reporter, the only guy who ever did this was like 10 years afterwards, 1983. An investigative reporter walked through the building with the engineer, the guy who was there from day one, the guy who knew every single outlet, Hunley, in that building. Guy knew every single light switch. And he said, "Where's the burglar alarm?" And he goes, "What burglar alarm?" And he explained to him that there was none, never was one, couldn't have been one, didn't have one. And the guy said, "Holy shit, that means Hunt and McCord were in this thing together." And right there from the burglar alarm story alone, and there's much more, but the phony burglar alarm story, and it's in Hunt's memoirs, and it's in McCord's memoirs, but it ain't in anybody else's memoirs because it didn't exist.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Super chat from TB. Question: was there any truth to the rumor that Richard Nixon ordered the break-in of Watergate to retrieve any information that linked his brother Donald to Howard Hughes and their money for hamburger restaurants?
No, in fact, there's nothing on the tapes about that. There's nothing in writing about that. He didn't order the break-ins. He had no knowledge of the break-ins. Whatever you want to think of Nixon, this was being run by John Dean down below. And in theory, Mitchell was over Dean. But even Mitchell, I think, didn't even know. Now, that being said, I mean, Nixon did want to get the stuff that was in the Brookings Institution safe because the Ellsberg release by the Rand Corporation had so insanely driven the administration crazy that they were in a panic as to what else Ellsberg had. And they went to the Pentagon, and the report was missing from the Pentagon. And it was stolen from the Pentagon, the actual report. And they flipped out and they said, "Where is that report?" And they said, it's at the Brookings Institute. And they said that if they contacted the Brookings Institute and asked for it, they would know that they were looking for it and they would never give it up. So Nixon said, "Let's blow the safe. Let's get the report. I don't care about the law. Let's get this done." And what he wanted was to see what else Ellsberg had put in there. And they didn't know what Ellsberg had other than the Pentagon papers. They thought he had more. They thought there was a tip that he had from the FBI, actually, that he had given the Pentagon papers and other documents to the Soviet embassy, and they were legitimately freaking out. Kissinger was apoplectic, and Nixon was freaking out, not about secrets, but about national security. That's what people don't understand. This all came from Ellsberg and the national security state being violated. And again, Nixon, after the release of the Pentagon papers, he said, "Forget about it. What do I have to do with this? This is all about Kennedy and Johnson." And Kissinger came to him and says, "You've got to do something because this guy's violated the Espionage Act, not unlike a certain guy who just pled guilty to violating the Espionage Act, Julian Assange." And they said, "We got to go after Ellsberg because we don't know what else he has. He obviously stole top secret documents. He obviously has top secret clearance. He's obviously given this to the Soviets in their mind, according to the FBI." And they said, we can't have a government. We can't have a government if we're going to give away stuff like this. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Okay, from Rumble, T. Gaggiotti wants to know, how young was Woodward when he first met Al Haig?
How young was Woodward? Well, he was 29 when he was at the Washington Post. So I think it was probably 2 or 3 years before that, because he was briefing for the Pentagon. He was what's that?
Yeah, he was stationed in D.C.
Right. He was in the Pentagon briefing Haig and others at the time. So 26, 25 in there.
And he could have run into him before when he was in the Navy.
Oh, yeah.
You never, so who knows?
Yeah.
But interesting.
But he denies it to the hilt. He denies it despite overwhelming evidence that he briefed Alexander Haig. I mean, it's amazing the lengths that he will go to deny certain things. I mean, just crazy nuclear levels of denying stuff that has been revealed already.
Yeah. Dennis Moreland wants to know, have you read Haldeman's book? And what is your assessment?
I have not. It's on a list of Haldeman's diaries, I think is what he's referring to. The Haldeman diaries are a great source. I have the book because you can look at the tapes through the book. It's actually transcripts of Haldeman in the tapes. Now, that being said, what they wanted to do, what the Nixon White House wanted to do, what Buchanan wanted to do, was take out just the Dean tapes and turn over the stuff that had Dean on it and destroy the rest. And if they would have done that, they would have survived. If they didn't have to destroy them all, according to Buchanan. This is early on. Buchanan says, he transcribed the Dean tapes. He says, I'm going to make notes on all of Dean's words, and I'm going to show you where Dean is lying. So he goes through this for a week or 3 weeks, whatever it took Buchanan to do this. And he said, let's release this to either the press or to the committee. And they said, no way. And the guy who insisted no way was Alexander Haig. Alexander Haig was speaking on behalf of the president, but no one knows if he was really, on many occasions, many people know whether he's speaking on behalf of the president or not, because you don't know. I mean, Haldeman was brutally harsh, and you knew when he was speaking to the president.
All right. Tim Pierce wants to know, does Mark believe Watergate was originally to hide a wife's former profession as an escort call girl?
Okay, so there's multiple reasons for these break-ins, and Dean's motivation for this particular. Now, keep in mind, they go into the Watergate 4 times. They have the key. Martinez has the key to the desk drawer. In that desk drawer are the photos of the call girls. Mo Dean is living with Heidi Reichen. I mean, I don't know how much closer you can get to the madam other than living with her. I mean, and I think Dean's motivation in that particular part of the operation was to get those photos. Now, it's not the only reason to go in there, but it is multiple reasons that to go in there.
All right, we'll just follow up, or similar. Has it been proven to your satisfaction that Mo Dean was a prostitute with the Hollywood or the Washington madam?
Absolutely. Not a doubt in my mind.
Did Nixon ever regret?
In fact, Dean and his wife tried to sue everyone after the fact and backed off on every single lawsuit, never followed through. They huffed and puffed and bluffed and never did it, as per Liddy and everyone else. So it was, in other words, they complained too loudly.
Died to protest too much.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see here. Stephen Dodd wants to know a question. Mark, what's your thoughts on the Nixon movie with Anthony Hopkins? I watched it recently and thought it was really good.
There's a better movie called Final Days you might want to take a look at. It's based on the book by Woodward and Bernstein, but the movie is really well done. It's actually better than Nixon.
Who plays Nixon in that?
Some character actor. There's no names in the movie whatsoever. Much better movie. Much better movie.
Okay. Scott Bimbo said, so watching these, you're saying Nixon was not a crook? Have a bug out placed close to Eagle Tails, beautiful in November. You'll have to hook to Starlink. Supporters can arm you to the neck. YouTube, not teeth.
I don't know what YouTube, not teeth, but so you're saying Nixon was not a crook. In what regard? I mean, it's such a crook of what? Taking money? Is that what you mean, bro? I mean, he didn't take any money. I mean, how do you define crook?
In comparison to LBJ, no.
I mean, LBJ took the furniture and the silverware with him when he left. He was actually a crook. I mean, I don't think Nixon physically stole any money. He may have been a guy who violated the Constitution and broke the law. I mean, that's clearly open for debate. In fact, he says, I don't care about the law, about the Brookings Institute, about blowing the safe. He said, I don't give a shit about the law. But from their point of view, they believe, Liddy believes, and if you read Will and you read some of these memoirs, they believe the country is in the middle of a revolution. And it's hard to explain to someone who didn't live through it what the climate was in the country. You think it's bad now? Not even close, my friends. I mean, bombings every single day all over the country. The White House was surrounded. I mean, I could go into it, but we don't have the time. That being said, they did things that they believed were necessary because of the climate in the country. And you could say whatever you want and get on a high horse about it. But you're talking about a guy that won by the biggest landslide in American history 5 minutes before. So I think he felt he had some sort of a mandate, Eric, right? I mean, when you win every
Well,
49 states and 2 minutes later, they're trying to take you down and the country's exploding in revolution. I mean, what are you going to do? Ignore it? I mean, the guy did what he had to do in his mind at that time. So, it's a complicated question, but it's not that simplistic to simply ask if he was a crook.
True. Mac Wallace Arbitration Service. That's a pretty good name. Question: did Nixon ever regret taping his conversations because they made him sound shady, especially when discussing finding $1 million for burglars?
Again, finding $1 million for burglars is a simplistic statement. They agreed to pay the legal fees of every single burglar that was there. That is not illegal, and they agreed, and they thought it was morally correct to do it. The shakedown of extortion comes from Howard Hunt. That's a separate issue, and we're going to get into that separately. A lot of this stuff is people drank the Kool-Aid of the Democratic Party and the Watergate Committee back in the day, and they cemented it by saying it over and over and over again. There's a ton of nuance in these statements. Did he? I'm sorry. What was the front end of that question?
Did he regret taping himself because he sounded bad later?
I think he regretted not destroying the tapes. I mean, the taping itself was done by every single president, so that was not a regret. And the president's retirement money would be the book or the memoirs that would come from the tapes. That was what it was for. He may have regretted having a voice-activated tape machine put in by the Secret Service. The voice-activated one was different than the LBJ one, where the secretary had to push a button when LBJ said, take this one, which meant record this one. What Nixon had was a voice-activated machine in numerous places in the White House, living quarters, Oval Office, and West Wing, or whatever, executive office building, and he may have regretted that. But not the taping. I mean, I think he regretted not destroying the tapes, which is what Connolly said he should do, and what Buchanan said he could do, should have done. But he was too much of a lawyer to break the law. I mean, his real problem is he was so reverential to the law that he kind of screwed himself because everyone was telling him close to him to just simply destroy the tapes. In fact, when he takes them back to San Clemente, not too far from where I am now, he listens to them, the ones requested by by Cox, the special prosecutor, and he could have simply thrown them in the ocean. I mean, he has this is before he turns them over, Eric. Remember the Supreme Court rules 9-0 that he's got to turn over the tapes. Okay. He says, let me take these tapes. I'm going to go to San Clemente for 3 weeks. I'm going to listen to these goddamn tapes because he did not know. I mean, think about taping everything for years. You have no markers. There's no index of tape recordings. There's nothing. And he doesn't know what's on it, where it is. So he takes like these 14 tapes that are being subpoenaed and he brings them back to San Clemente and he begins listening to them for things that he said. He doesn't even remember. Not that he has any problem with his memory. It's just he taped a zillion hours of tapes, Eric.
Oh, I don't remember everything, every conversation that I ever have. That's
right. I mean, he's recorded every single conversation he's ever had as president. And he doesn't know where anything is and there's no markers, there's no index. On the box of the tapes, it says the date and who was there. That's about it. And they're reel-to-reel tapes,
Well, and think about listening to that too. I mean, assuming it's let's just say it's just a straight workday, 9 to 5.
Yeah.
That's 40 hours of footage every week times 52 weeks.
Yep.
How are you going to go through that? I mean, nowadays we could say, okay, well, we'll run it through AI or something and find different parts. But yeah, that's you don't have time to listen to what you did because you're busy doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, he literally goes back to, he literally has to shut down the government for 3 weeks so he could go back and listen to the tapes as a lawyer. And then he becomes the de facto lawyer for everyone else, advising them. If you listen to the David Frost interviews, Frost Nixon, he says, one of my mistakes is I started to lawyer them and tell them what to do with the grand jury, what to do with the legal fees. We're going to get them money. And he says, in my mind, I didn't have anything to do with this. So I just became their advisor. And this is what he believed. Whether you think he's a liar or not is up to you. But this is what he said in his memoirs. This is what he believed, that he was lawyering them. That being said, Buchanan and the others simply said also to not give up the tapes despite a 9-0 ruling by the Supreme Court. He said that's one branch of government. That's another institution. That's their problem. That was Buchanan's advice. And Haldeman and Ehrlichman saying, do not honor this 9-0 ruling. It's completely political. And why would you do this? That's their opinion. And so, he was too much of a lawyer, too much of a, constitutionalist to disagree. But again, his advisor, he didn't take the advice of his advisors.
That actually reminds me of Andrew Jackson. I don't know if you remember the Supreme Court made a decision and Andrew Jackson said, oh, that's fine. Now who's going to enforce it?
Right. I think that's what Pat Buchanan was saying. I think he cited that, as a matter of fact, in his memos to Nixon. But it's his own doing, and it's really because he's too honest and too much reverence for the law as a lawyer that did him in. I gave them a sword, they stuck it in, they twisted it. I did it to myself. The famous lines that he gives David Frost are true. But he did have a photographic memory. I mean, the times that I met him and talked to him, astounding memory of every single little nuance about whatever he talked to you about the previous time. So that was bizarre, but he was a fast thinking guy. I mean, if you look at the interviews with him and David Frost, you can see the wheels turning in his head, his eyes darting back and forth. The camera is really on close on him. And he just comes up with these long, brilliant answers to every single question that Frost throws at him. And I went, oh, I didn't see that coming. That's interesting.
I don't remember this question. What year did Nixon die? Was it like 92?
92, I think, roughly in there. I'm not sure. Because everyone shows up at the funeral. Everybody was there. He'd already been rehabilitated. And what's her name? Diane Sawyer is the one who does his memoirs with him. She moves in with him in San Clemente. And in fact, she's part of the
94. Sorry.
94. So she's part of the post arrest and imprisonment and resignation of all the top staff. Like the second team comes in after they're all arrested and sent to jail. And Diane Sawyer is part of that crew.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. This is actually Otto in disguise from Locals. Was Nixon serious when he said if it hadn't been for Martha Mitchell, there would have been no Watergate?
I don't think he's serious about it. I've never heard that. And, I mean, she was a drunk who got on the phone with people and blabbed to gossip columnists.
All right. A lot of people in the chat are concerned about Bigfoot appearing behind you.
I know there's something back there in the bushes. That's why I thought I heard something rustling back there. There's certain creatures here at night. This is mountain lion country where I am, so there's signs everywhere. So I am a little bit conscious.
How about bears? Do you have bears?
There's no bears. No, there's no bears here. There's just mountain lions, and some of them are 140 pounds, but they're everywhere. And
yeah, they'll take you out.
Yeah, if you're sitting down, if you're standing up, they usually go after kids and girls on bikes or hikers who are tiny.
And pets
in general. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm sitting down, so I thought they might get me from behind.
All right. Well, we'll be sure to tell you. We see a mountain lion.
I don't have eyes in the back of my head.
Yeah. Well,
but some bicycle store owner down here came up with a brilliant plan of selling bike helmets with eyes on the back of the bike helmet to stop the mountain lions from jumping
not a bad
out of the trees. It worked. It actually worked. It was a brilliant idea. And he quickly sold out and started making more of them. Because if they see the eyes looking at you, they won't kill you.
Just so everybody understands that I'm prepared. So if a mountain lion should come, I'm going to do this.
Oh, yeah. Go wide so we can see it.
Exactly. I mean, this is important.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're up in those trees. I mean, that's kind of where they linger.
All right. Boxer Chick 100. Did Dorothy Kilgallen help blow the lid off Watergate? Sorry, Mark, couldn't help myself.
It's funny because it's Dorothy Kilgallen's time to shine, and yet nothing happens because there's nothing there. I don't know what her writings were about Watergate. I mean,
well, I think she was dead by then.
Well, then she wrote nothing. I mean, it's sad.
Didn't she die?
How long did she live after JFK?
Well, she visited Ruby, and right, Ruby died in the 60s.
That's 64.
65.
I don't know when she died, but we never got that book about Ruby, which is sad. But the movie, I don't know what happened in the movie. It's supposed to be Barry Levinson directing a movie about Dorothy
65.
Kilgallen.
She died.
Oh, 65. Okay. So she missed Watergate. She could have blown that case wide open if she'd been alive.
Of course, never move over Woodward and Bernstein. We got Kilgallen on the case. All right, Eric R. Was the media coverage of Watergate influenced by Operation Mockingbird, or was it simply the media's liberal bias?
Well, no, I mean, we went into great detail about Bob Woodward's link to Operation Mockingbird, and then Carl Bernstein, of course, in 75, rather, he writes the famous Rolling Stone article, 20,000-word article about Operation Mockingbird. But clearly, no one was closer to Mockingbird than Bob Woodward. I mean, he's in the belly of the beast. He's at the Pentagon. The next 2 minutes later, he's writing for the Washington Post, without any journalism credentials at all.
All right. Jenny Risner, question. Who was Nixon's A2 brute during the Watergate scandal? Haig?
I would guess it was Haig. Yeah, I think it was Haig. And it's funny because everyone told him about Haig, and he had a reverence for military people.
Kind of like somebody else?
Yes. I mean, this is apparently quite a common phenomenon. I mean, Haig had two things going on. One, he was deep throat. Number two, he wasn't a very good political advisor. He had no experience being a political advisor. Buchanan would have been the guy to really do it, to replace Haldeman, but not Haig. Not Haig. Haig was done the second he walked in the door, and all he did was feed information to Woodward and Bernstein. I think from that point, give bad advice to Nixon. It may have been intentional. It may have been just his own ignorance. I'm not really sure, but I think we are pretty sure about his involvement as Deep Throat at this point. Although Deep Throat was probably a conglomeration of 2 or 3 people.
Yeah, which actually makes sense.
Right, but nobody's closer to the flame inside the White House. That's what I'm saying. Nobody's there except Haig. There's nobody in there. There's no more Haldeman. There's no more Ehrlichman. There's no more Colson. They're all gone. The only one who's there is Haig.
Fair enough. 556 Pew Pew's a new member. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
TB with $10. Can you think of any 2 more corruptible president and vice president on the same ticket as Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew?
Yes. What do you mean by corruptible?
Well, I can think of many.
Had the ability to be corrupted?
Yeah,
I don't know if
I have a feeling
is the right word.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if they wrote this as a legitimate statement, then yes, I could think of many, many more corruptible people, including the latest ticket, who's currently in the White House.
Yeah,
I mean, I can, and I can think of. Nixon,
when we get into Agnew, you'll find out more about Agnew. Again, you're someone who's watched the History Channel way too much, bro. Forget about the History Channel. There's more to this than meets the eye. When Haig goes to Spiro Agnew and said, "I want you to resign. You can take this the easy way. You can take it the hard way." Agnew said, "Are you threatening me?" And he said, "You bet your ass I am." Now, that is not normal politics. So we'll see what happens when we get to Agnew.
Fair enough. Nain Rouge question. Dorothy Hunt was CIA. She died in a sudden plane crash. Was it an assassination of Dorothy Hunt?
No. And there are people who lived in that plane crash. In fact, like I said, Greg Bedell was there covering it for radio in Chicago at the time. And she had $10,000 on her, which was they were going to invest in a company because they had been cut off financially. Hunt and his wife. She was CIA though, and they didn't want to kill everyone to get to Dorothy Hunt. That's a little bit of overkill. They could have shot her in the head, for Christ's sakes. It's a little
Well, the
much.
Soviets do that.
Right. It's just insane. It's just so crazy. The Soviets do that, but that's not what we do. I mean, you could easily have driven. We tend to drive the cars off the road, or alter your brakes, or simply shoot you in the head. That's not our style. And there were other people on that plane who probably didn't want to die. But Hunt's wife was the one, ironically, who made the arrangements for the phony banquet dinner at the Watergate the night of the break-in. And she said there was going to be 10 guests. She picked out the menu, and she was working. She actually was working on the Watergate break-in, and nobody knows that.
Okay.
Yeah. In other words, they had a phone. We'll get into it, but they had a phony banquet dinner with real food. And the idea was that they were going to stay behind after. They had a phony film made, a phony corporate film. There was supposed to be a corporation called the Emeritus Corporation, and they were having a meeting of these 8 or 10 members, depending on it was booked for 10, but Liddy and Hunt were across the street, and there was lobster, there was bourbon, there was cigars, they had this whole long dinner, and then supposedly Hunt and Martinez got locked in the closet. Even that story has now been debunked. But nevertheless, there was a phony banquet dinner because the servers have testified to the FBI, the guys who served the food.
Okay. Wally Tango Foxtrot question. Have you looked at Nelson Rockefeller as the principal conspirator from JFK to Ford? Almost made POTUS.
I don't think he had the motivation to do what it's like one of these guys who's independently wealthy, has a ton of power. He's not like a Biden or a LBJ in that regard. This guy has everything.
Real money. He's like Bill.
Yeah. I mean, again, this name. It's one of these things like whatchamacallit, over in Europe, the Jewish family that everybody
Rothschild.
The Rothschild. They just go Rothschild and go, yeah, what about it? Bro, it's the Rothschilds. Like, yeah. And I mean, there's different Rockefellers. One of them got eaten by cannibals, which is probably where the Biden got that story from, because Rockefeller did get eaten by cannibals. And
John was a prick by most accounts.
Yeah, no. Okay. Well, what did those tell us? Go talk to David Becker about being a prick. Every capitalist bigwig is a prick. That's how they got there.
Definitely. Nain Rouge question. It's known that many presidents allowed political assassinations / murders. Were any attributed to Richard Nixon?
Well, I mean, he runs Operation 40. I mean, they're trying to assassinate half of Central America and South America under his crime, assassination, political crime division. So, yeah, I mean, there's blood on Nixon's hand, but they could justify it by saying, we got to get rid of these guys. We got to get rid of these commies. And he was involved as Eisenhower's top guy in getting rid of Castro. That didn't work. Other ones did work. The Trujillo one and the Dominican worked. Not all of them worked.
All right. The old ballpark. No, just a funny Sam Irvin hearings moment. Ehrlichman got smart with him. How do you know that, Senator? Irvin instant response, because I understand the English language as my mother taught me. Okay.
Okay. Well, he was a hillbilly.
I see. No question. That's why. No question.
He was a hillbilly frontman for Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy thought he was a rube, and they wanted this rube out there as a front man like Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies. That was intentional on the part of Ted Kennedy.
Okay. Dustin Russell said, I think LBJ is back there, Mark.
Could be.
556 Pew Pew with, I think that's a Norwegian kroner, maybe? Okay.
Weird.
Could Watergate have been avoided if they covered up better? I know it's a lot of loose threads.
It's not a question of covering up better. What we're saying is it was intentional that they got caught. I don't think you understand where we're going with this history of Watergate. It's not my take on it. There's many historical revisionists who have dug out documents during the Freedom of Information Act, including Judicial Watch just 2 years ago. So this is happening in real time, and there's numerous books about it. People are stuck in this History Channel narrative, and we're going to change that by showing you what really happened. The break-in was designed for them to get caught. I know this sounds crazy, but I'm far from being alone in this.
Okay. From Rumble, what are your thoughts on John Hopsicker's hypothesis in Barry and the Boys that Watergate was done in response to Nixon's efforts to move in on the CIA's drug smuggling turf?
Crock of shit. It's meaningless. Meaningless. It's not moving in on anything. All he cared about was foreign policy. All of these crazy things that they assigned to Nixon. Nixon ate, drank, and breathed foreign policy. All he cared about was foreign policy, making peace with Sadat, splitting the Russians from the Chinese communists, making an ABM deal with Brezhnev, opening the door to China, working with Kissinger on foreign policy. Domestic policy, he was much more liberal, Eric has mentioned, with HEW, with creating the
EPA,
forerunner to
Title IX.
EPA Title IX, the forerunner to Obamacare. With having an HMO that was under his watch too. I mean,
HMO,
all of his,
yeah.
he invented the HMO with Kaiser, who was his biggest contributor was Kaiser. Kaiser Permanente comes out of Kaiser Aluminum, and Kaiser comes to him after the election and says, "What if we just had an assembly line of healthcare?" And Nixon goes, "All right, write it up. Let's see how it comes out." And that becomes Kaiser Permanente. His domestic stuff was much more liberal, nowhere near his predecessor, who was LBJ. But all he cared about was ending the war, peace with honor, getting out of Vietnam, and the things I just mentioned. I know this sounds insane, but there's a million books on it.
Wow. 556 Pew Pew gifted 10 memberships to people. Thank you very much. It's like $50 in memberships. And
Wow.
Mick Yellow is also a new member. Thank you. Sergeant Willie, Watergate trivia. Exterior shots of the hotel were used as Robert Wagner's apartment in the 60s TV show It Takes a Thief.
Okay, there's a million people who live there, including Pat Buchanan. So there's hundreds and hundreds of apartments there.
Okay.
And offices and restaurants and conference rooms. The Watergate complex is so enormous that John Mitchell lived there, and inside was the Federal Reserve Bank board was in there too, and the DNC and Buchanan. A lot of things were in that complex.
All right. Let me see. This is an interesting question. Has Mark listened to Jim DiEugenio's Watergate talks on Black Ops Radio? I believe he talked about the CIA's Project Jennifer was somehow involved with the Watergate burglaries.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. I have.
Okay. I didn't know Jim DiEugenio covered Watergate.
Oh, there's a lot about it. He knows a lot about it.
Okay. Question. Were Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley major factors in the whole Watergate mojo that got stirred up, aside from setting papers / motivations or common motivations?
Well, if you read the biography of Bradley, not the autobiography, the biography of Bradley, the top one, he didn't believe a thing that Bob Woodward told him. It goes on, he says, meeting in the garage. He says he met there once, 20 times, 50 times. Who the hell knows if he met in the garage or not? He didn't buy it. But that being said, it's all papers. He said, we're not in the truth business. We're in the business of transmitting the news. A lot of times we're in the business of lies. They don't know when they're printing something, nor do they care if it's a lie. If that was I know this sounds crazy to people, But if they were in the business of truth telling, they would have to check every single politician's quote from the history of time, and they couldn't put out a newspaper. And this is kind of what he was talking about. He says, was Woodward lying? Yeah, he was lying half the time. He says, but that we're not in the business of printing the truth. We're in the business of printing articles.
You know what's funny about it is, if you talk about that in current news, everybody will be like, yeah, hell yeah, I see it. But as you research this, it's been going on for 100 years that they've been lying, that the press lies.
I'm saying it's not the business. It's not the business of a newspaper. I'm just saying, forget about the big picture. Get into the little picture. The little picture is, it's not the business of a newspaper to know if a guy issuing a press release is telling the truth or not. In other words, they don't have that luxury of deciding. Well, I don't know if we're both gone now. Oh, I'm back. Oh,
No,
Hunley's back. In other words, they believe it's true, but history has proven them wrong. Maybe a week later, maybe 10 years later, that if there's an article, I look at New York Times articles all the time from the 60s and 70s that are wrong, but they printed them.
Well, there's a whole book about it.
And I'm not talking about political propaganda. I'm just talking about factual errors.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I'm not talking about intentional political propaganda. I'm talking about factual errors that are lies that become truth later, or it's revealed later that was a lie without any political intent. I'm not talking about two different things. I'm not talking about political intention.
Right.
Okay,
well, and that's why they even had ombudsman at one time, though, who would address a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
And things called retractions. So let me see. Dennis Moreland, question. Do you think, pretty much. Do you think McCord's shoddy use of duct tape on the door looks deliberate? Or Locke's was deliberate?
Oh, yeah, it was deliberate. It was deliberate. And we're going to show you that when we get into McCord. It was absolutely deliberate. Yeah.
All right.
There's a lot about McCord that's deliberate here.
Question, maybe premature, but is it a coincidence that Bush Sr. and Al Haig were both involved in Nixon's resignation and later prominent on the day Reagan was shot? I don't know that Bush Sr. was involved with the resignation.
Bush hated Al Haig, and they got rid of him as soon as possible. They thought he was a threat, and they didn't want him anywhere near their administration.
Yeah, and also, did Bush Sr. have anything to do with Nixon?
Well, he was the head of the RNC, and they talked about making him vice president. He was in the hopper too as vice president, both as legitimate vice president and also replacement, for Ford later. But they actually liked him quite a bit. He was quite likable. The old man, that is. The kid wasn't around yet. So, yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say, I know he was CIA director, but that was under Carter.
Yeah, that was later. That was later. Yeah.
So I didn't know how much actual direct involvement he had. Nain Rouge, question. Did Ford really need to give Nixon a pardon? Wasn't Nixon immune to prosecution?
Well, it's debatable.
No.
They wanted him in jail. They were going to jail him. They wanted him to come back from San Clemente. And if it wasn't for the pardon, that would have happened. He would have been put on trial. Not unlike today. That's where this comes from, folks. This is why we're doing this. The situation today comes from Watergate in many, many ways. Many, many ways.
They had the votes to impeach him.
The votes to impeach him and the votes to convict, more important.
Exactly. And then after that, they would try him, like all the other Watergate burglars.
Right.
So
right.
It was wise for him to just duck out and take the pardon.
It really was wise for him to get out. And his daughters went berserk. His wife was against it. Everyone was against it around him. But he had made up his mind to get out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it was probably logical, and people, are like, why? Because they want to fight it. But he was a lame duck president.
Yeah.
Who already served one full term. He was halfway through the next term. So really, he only had less than 2 years left anyway. What
Right.
was he going to do now other than fight and potentially lose everything?
Well, not only that, it would have been a nonstop hamstringing of his administration if he stayed on.
Yeah.
A lot of it was for the good of the country. I mean, from in his point of view, a lot of it was. Not everything's black and white, people. I mean, there's a lot of gray here. He was drinking heavily, he was taking pills, whatever. I mean, there's different factors involved here.
Yeah, good point. Dustin wants to know, if not Watergate, then what? How did they reel in Nixon?
If not Watergate, then what?
I think that's the same. This is the motivation. They couldn't control him, so they went after him with Watergate.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as soon as Chappaquiddick happens and it knocks Teddy Kennedy out of the race, they begin to deal with this Watergate situation. And I think the whole thing is a setup because they realize they do not have a candidate for 4, 6, possibly 8 years until he rehabilitates himself in his mind, Teddy Kennedy, by 1980. By then, it's too late. But look at it from a 1972 window. Look at how the world looks in 1972 from a Democratic point of view. You've got a mortally wounded Ted Kennedy from Chappaquiddick, and now you've got a bunch of bench players like McGovern, like Muskie. These guys are easily defeatable. These are the backbenchers of the Democratic Party that they literally throw into the machine to be chopped up like mincemeat because they have put all their eggs in the Ted Kennedy basket. Chappaquiddick changes all that. And the only way to get even is to do something like Watergate. And they arrested and jailed so many members of the Republican Party. It's astounding when you look at the list, how many people went to jail. They began to get into the financing. They began to go after who were the donors. It's very similar to today. They wanted to decimate the entire Republican Party. And they found a opening to do this through their creation of this phony burglary. And they rode this train just like the Russiagate, just like the dossier, and the similarities are breathtaking.
Okay. I just saw in local, somebody corrected me. I forgot about that. Bush was not CIA director under Carter. He was CIA director under Ford.
Okay.
So I just want to set the record straight. I forgot. I like this one. H2O Gate was Liddy's license plate.
That's funny. Yeah,
you gotta appreciate that.
No, nobody drowned at Watergate, so I mean, whatever you make of it, nobody died. Put it that way.
Oh God! Remember when we did that Liddy episode? I found that Fear Factor episode with Joe Rogan talking about and Liddy's like sitting in this like really cramped up place with like I think there are rats or just all kinds of weirdness. He's just like
weird.
Just chuckling like, yeah, hey, I'm just relaxing and chilling. Everybody's like freaking out and they all run scampering out of there. Meanwhile, he's just like, okay, this is fun.
Well, I mean, Liddy was loaded for bear, and these people had other agendas. The people below Liddy, and Hunt was there with Liddy to keep an eye on Liddy, I think, and Hunt is up to his eyeballs in conspiracy with this Watergate thing.
Fletcher boy, Mrs. Liddy owned several firearms.
That I don't. Who, his wife?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
he wouldn't be able to own them. He was a felon.
Yeah. So she became very good friends with Dorothy Hunt, and they had multiple dinners together at each other's homes, and didn't like how their husbands were becoming like teenage boys, feeding off each other, getting into this spy game.
All right. Well, just that line sounds like something that Liddy might have said when he was on the radio a lot. Like, well, just so you know, Mrs. Liddy owns a lot of weapons. Question. Who did Nixon think Deep Throat was?
I don't know who he thought it was, but he didn't have any idea. They mentioned Mark Felt at one point, They believed it was Mark Felt.
Okay.
They believed it was coming out of Mark Felt, honestly, from what I've read.
Wow. 556 Pew Pew just gave another 10 AUS memberships and might have given another 10, but I thought I had already showed that gift. So it's possible 556 Pew Pew has given either 20 or 30 memberships, but
Holy crap.
thank you. Seriously, that is so generous and amazing.
Is this the same thing, or now it's like 30?
I don't know, because like I said, I saw it and I was like, oh, I already showed that. But now I'm going, because this one just came in. No, it might have been 30. I'll have to look it up later. But thank you very much. Mary S. gave away a membership as well. Thank you. Danny Ayers. Question, though. Republican senator from Alabama told Nixon in a phone call that he would vote to impeach Nixon, and the next day Nixon resigned. True or not? Probably true.
Well, no, the heart of the party came up, including Barry Goldwater. I don't know about the Alabama senator, but the mainstream Republican rank and file came up and told him that the votes weren't there. So phone call, regardless of the phone call, I think it was really Goldwater. And there was a dinner. Interestingly enough, there was a dinner at the White House, a tiny dinner with like 10 people or something. And Goldwater was there, and Nixon got shit-faced, and Buchanan disputes that he got shit-faced, and Goldwater wrote about it in his memoir, saying he's never seen Nixon out of control and drunk and belligerent like this. And he wasn't that close to Nixon, and Buchanan said, hey, he was always like that. You know, he would get drunk and say stuff, and then it didn't really faze him. But it was apparently astonishing to Goldwater, and he thought he was losing it at the end. And Buchanan said he wasn't. It was just Nixon venting and getting drunk. He said, like anybody else would, faced with these circumstances. But to Goldwater, it was a debacle, private dinner, and he just said Nixon was drunk and out of control.
Okay. And Jason Willis just confirmed that it was 30 memberships that were given by Pew Pew 556. So thank you.
Holy crap.
That is amazing. Nain Rouge. Was the intelligence agencies the primary group in Nixon's fall?
Well, I mean, you got the two big ones involved. I mean, you've got the smoking gun tape where he asks Helms to get the FBI off their case. And so the two of them are involved. There's the Bay of Pigs threat that he sends Haldeman over to talk to Helms about. Because he, and this sounds, you know, in hindsight to be, you know, crazy, but he felt that Mark felt a lot of this, which has never really been covered, is the power vacuum left by Hoover's death. And that's where Mark Felt, the weasel, fills that void and begins to vie for the nomination of FBI director. If Hoover doesn't die, none of this happens. None of this happens. It's the death of Hoover, which is very rarely mentioned regarding Watergate. And that's where Felt begins to do his deep-throatish stuff. And L. Patrick Gray has his confirmation denied by the Senate. And there's a whole lot of crazy crap going on at the FBI. The CIA merely says, we don't want to tell the FBI what to do, and that's about the end of it. But as I said a couple of weeks ago, they tried to create their own intelligence unit out of the White House because they couldn't get the FBI to do anything about Ellsberg. So they created their own plumbers unit to plug the leaks and to break into Fielding's office in Beverly Hills. If the FBI and Hoover were at the top of their game, none of this would have been necessary. That being said, it was a threat to the CIA that they were doing this, and they had broken into the Chilean embassy in Washington, which was something, in my opinion, the CIA would have normally done themselves. They broke into the house of the ambassador of Chile, and they broke into the second in command's house. There's multiple burglaries that nobody knows about or never talk about regarding the plumbers unit. They did a lot of burglaries, and the one we remember is the one at the DNC, which is really a phony one. But they broke into a lot of places.
All right. And Vroom, question: was G. Gordon Liddy at the end of the day just a failed FBI agent?
No, far from it. I mean, he was a assistant district attorney. If you see the episode, I mean, I had some experience with him when he tried to bust Bard and got himself stuck in the trunk of a car. So he might have been a failed assistant DA. He was running for office. He was running for the Hamilton Fish seat up in Dutchess County, and they wanted him to get out of the way for the Fish family. Part of the Fish family, of course, is Albert Fish, the moon maniac, the serial killer. But Hamilton Fish was running for that seat, and they wanted to clear it out. And they told Liddy, we would give you a job in the Treasury Department in D.C. if you leave Dutchess County and come to D.C., which is how Liddy is moved out of New York State as assistant. He was assistant district attorney even when I was in school there. And he had raided, obviously, we talked about this in the Liddy episode if people want to see it, but he was involved in over-the-top stuff in Dutchess County.
Yeah, he was also on Miami Vice.
That's right. Yeah.
So there you go.
I mean, Liddy was trying to make a name for himself when he was in the FBI, and I think he was sent to Arizona, and he did a lot of black bag break-ins, not on his own. I mean, he was following orders from higher ups, mostly William Sullivan, who was second in command in the FBI, and he learned how to break in and get stuff done in black bag operations for the FBI.
Side trivia note too. Larry King has stated that G. Gordon Liddy was his favorite guest of all time.
Is that true?
Yeah, that
I never heard that.
This is the guy who's interviewed Frank Sinatra and others. That he loved Liddy over everybody. Wow. He was like just an incredible.
He's a colorful cat. He's a colorful guy. But I think he was duped by the rest of this crew. He's the only like non-CIA person in the break-in.
Well, he's a stand-up dude. I think that's why people like him so much, is because when he went to prison, I mean, everybody should check out our episode on, because I mean, he's a fascinating guy. And then when he went to prison, he helped everybody else. He was like the Shawshank Redemption.
Well, how about the fact that he took down the warden?
That's what I'm saying. Which was the Shawshank Redemption. I can't help but wonder if Stephen King wasn't influenced by G. Gordon Liddy when he wrote, Rita Hayworth in the Shawshank Redemption and that character. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, just interesting. Nain Rouge, if the intelligence agencies are behind Watergate, then what did Nixon do to make the agencies go after and destroy him?
It's interesting how people put the blame on someone who's the victim of the. It's kind of like saying, what did Trump do to make the 51 intelligence agents sign a document and go after him? I mean, is that the question? What did he do? He opened the door to China. He's trying to sign an ABM treaty with Russia. He's
shutting down Vietnam.
He's shutting down. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. You're kidding with that question, right? I mean, it's obvious what he was doing. And he did it in secret, which spooked the shit out of everyone. And we pointed out last week or 3 weeks ago, the Admiral Mora plot to spy, the military spy ring that was busted by spying on the Nixon White House.
All right. And somebody else pointed out. He also said he was going to talk about the JFK assassination.
Well, he said the Bay of Pigs thing. You could read into that what you want. He never said the JFK assassination.
Okay.
People read into the Bay of Pigs as that thing, but I don't know.
All right. Is Nixon a threat to CIA about Kennedy assassination? Coincidence that president becomes president, Ford becomes president, number 2 man on the Warren Commission. Yeah, we've talked about that.
Well, it's a quid pro quo. I mean, there's a guy who comes up with the magic bullet theory who becomes a senator from Pennsylvania. I mean, these are payoffs for doing the bidding for the deep state. It doesn't mean that Nixon's involved in the Kennedy assassination, because the reality of it is they trusted Gerald Ford. He was kind of a doofus. He did their bidding, and that was his payoff.
Even that, though, didn't you start to find out that Spectre was used and kind of abused by everyone?
Well, what's his name says it? I think O'Neill says it, that Spectre might have been abused and used by them. And also Jim DiEugenio says it, if I recall, that Spectre was not the draconian guy that he's made out to be, that he was manipulated into the magic bullet theory. But again, the payoff is the Senate seat.
Sure.
For Ford, it becomes the presidency indirectly through the VP slot. And the pardon. I mean, the pardon, I think, if you didn't have the pardon, it would have been chaos for 2 years and it would have been a bloodbath.
All right. Somebody else said that Nixon was pressuring Helms to hand over the JFK documents. So, I don't know.
So you say. There's no evidence of that, and there's no documentation of that.
Let me see.
I think he was threatening him about Bay of Pigs, and really the threat was Operation Mongoose and Operation 40. That was the threat.
All right. Question: did Nelson Rockefeller get rid of Nixon?
No.
He's just a beneficiary in more ways, right?
Nothing happened. I mean, he comes in for this VP spot that he didn't even want to hold the fort, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, it was that
was the end of it. Yeah.
Flesher Boy said, "Thanks, guys." Well, thank you. Eric R. Question: is the hatred faced by Nixon, Reagan, and now Trump mostly based on the fact that they didn't attend the right Ivy League schools?
No, not really. They just couldn't beat them at the polls. You got to keep in mind, the guy won 49 states. Say it over again in your head. He won 49 states in every electoral vote in the country. And they didn't have coattails, Nixon. But how do you stop a guy who has won 49 states? This is what they did. This is what they did, to Trump also. This is their game. This is their game. They can't beat you at the polls, so they try everything else but the vote of the American people.
All right.
Say what you want about Nixon. There was a silent majority. They were in support. He had a 60-something% approval rating, close to 70. I think it was like 68% approval rating after the election, and that is a mandate in our political system. So he did what he felt was not, his foreign policy was mandated.
True. Now, Mark, you could confirm this. I mean, I was alive at the time, but I was too damn little to notice anything. But a lot of like what you see on CNN, the 70s, and a lot of things that are being represented are an exaggeration, making it look like there were hippies running around everywhere. But in reality, they were still a minority, just a loud one. Would that be a fair statement? I think.
Could you repeat that just really quickly?
I was going to say, if you watch any of these retrospective shows about the 60s and the 70s, they make it look like everybody was a hippie and the youth was completely in an uprising. But in fact, wasn't that just a minority of people? Kind of like there aren't that many actual trans people in the country right now. It's just all the ones that are there are loud as hell.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. That's a good point.
Let me see. Let me go ahead and get these last ones wrapped up here because it looks like internet's not playing nicely. Pinochet's helicopter tour. Can you do a show on after Hoover chaos in the IC?
What's the IC?
I'm not sure. I was hoping that you would know that. Okay.
I see.
Okay. Birds, bees, and trees. What's the school the newscasters train at to do the Walter Cronkite voice? Can Mark please imitate Walter if at all possible?
Well, everyone spoke the same way. It almost was like Nixon. They went to this school. This is Walter Cronkite. It comes from Edward R. Murrow, the first CBS newscaster who speaks this way. And then they all do it. They all go to the Columbia School of Broadcasting. They all learn how to speak this way, including Richard Nixon, who did not go there. But if you watched enough television, you got to speak like that professionally. also if you look at the 1920s and 30s, gangsters actually spoke the way they did with that machine gun style of talking. I mean, films were really short because people spoke very quickly back in the 1920s and 30s. There's different styles of speaking all through American history.
Also, there are limitations on what a microphone could pick up, the technology at the time. So they had to keep their voice in a certain modulation so it would be clear and it would be listenable over distance. So.
Right. I think it slows down during the war years because it's all radio. And when Murrow is overseas during World War II, I think he begins to speak dramatically from the battlefield as a war correspondent.
Could be. Question, is it true that when the Kennedy assassination gets mentioned in Nixon's presence, he gets really nervous?
No, I think he was friends with Kennedy. When Kennedy is killed, he realizes this is his chance. He just says, we're back in the game because of Kennedy's death. He liked Kennedy. He didn't like Bobby Kennedy, but he liked JFK. They were friends. And his death opened the door for his comeback. Not that he did it, but I mean, it opened the door for him. He was as shocked as anyone.
All right. Terry Adams says, you both are a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you, Terry. Mo Bishop, what about Ruth Paine's involvement?
Well, she was in her lesbian relationship, obviously, with Dorothy Kilgallen, and that will be the subject of a future show.
Yes. And to close out, Dustin Russell says, Mark's internet is better in the woods.
Much better in the woods, because I have a Dixie cup and a string out here, and I'm going back to basics. Thanks, Dustin.
And basics are always a good thing to go to. So on that note, while the internet is holding up, we are going to shift over to the Locals after party because I know there's questions on Locals, especially for those guys. So today, instead of following Oswald over to Locals, we're going to follow Nixon here. Nixon. The brand new panda. It's Nixon the panda.
There's a great phone conversation between Nixon and his wife, Pat, about seeing the pandas at the D.C. Zoo, which if anybody can find it, it's really funny. They're behind glass. Can people touch them? Can you go up and touch the pandas, Pat? No, you can't touch them. Well, are they lovable? There's a crazy conversation with the two of them about the Chinese pandas coming to D.C.
All right. That sounds fantastic. We'll discuss Chinese pandas and DC over on Locals, and we'll see you guys there momentarily.
Okay.